Apologies for the brief delay, all of you. I want to welcome you to this online presentation hosted by the Research Network for Philosophy and Technology of the Technical Condition, the Entanglement of Technology, Culture and Society, which was published in July of this year by Boom Publishers and which was edited by Professor Tsjalling Swierstra from Maastricht University, who will introduce today's event by telling us something about the content and intent of the book and explain how it is structured and on what basic concept it is built. But also by Dr. Tamar Sharon from Radboud University in Nijmegen, Pieter Vermaas from Delft University of Technology, and myself. As Professor Swierstra will explain in more detail in a moment, the book is explicitly intended as an accessible introduction to the philosophy of technology, also and in particular for non-philosophers, which is to say for students and scholars coming from different disciplines within the humanities, but also from various social and even natural sciences. My name is Pieter Lemmens, and I'm a philosopher of technology affiliated to the Institute for Science and Society at Radboud University in Nijmegen, the Netherlands, and I'm a co-editor of the book. My task today, however, will be to moderate the debate, but you can also question me, of course. But first, let me introduce to you our speakers of today, Professor Tsjalling Swierstra, Dr. Stephen Dorrestijn, and Dr. Federica Lucivero. Professor Dr. Swierstra is chair of the philosophy department of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at Maastricht University in the Netherlands. He is a philosopher of technology whose field of interest concerns the ethics and the politics of new and emerging science and technologies. And the main focus of his work is on the analysis, evaluation, and anticipation of what he calls techno-moral change, in particular in fields such as genomics, nanotechnology, neuroscience, and synthetic biology. He is, as already mentioned, the chief editor of the book that we will present today, and he will introduce the book for us today. Then we have, as a first respondent, Dr. Stephen Dorrestijn. He is head of the research group Ethics and Technology at Saxion University of Applied Sciences in Enschede, the Netherlands. Dr. Dorstein is a philosopher of technology as well, who got his PhD at Twente University in the Netherlands. His dissertation was about the technical design of human existence and the phenomenon of technical mediation and subjectivation approached from a Foucaultian perspective. He has published on various topics related to the philosophy and ethics of technology, and he has also developed the so-called product impact tool, a technology assessment instrument which can support research on the impact of technical artifacts on the human, on society, and on the environment. Stephen will be the first to give a critical response to the book. Then, last but not least, Dr. Federica Lucivero, who is a senior researcher in data and ethics at the Ethox Center at the University of Oxford in the UK. Dr. Lucivero's expertise and interests span across different areas and disciplines: ethics and social studies of science and technology, bioethics, governance of innovation, philosophy of science and technology. Her past research focused on the ethical aspects of the increasing introduction of information technology in care pathways, individual health practices, and biomedical research. Her current research focuses on four main areas: the meanings of patient access to electronic health records, the government of health apps, the ethics and epistemology of biomedical research using electronic health records, and the meta-level question regarding the boundaries between bioethics and the social sciences. She has published widely on all of these topics, and she will give the second response today. So now that we are a bit familiar with the speakers, let me give the floor, or rather the mic, to Professor Swierstra to give us an impression of the book. Please, Tsjalling, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to share my screen. And then you should all see this. So this is the cover of the book, The Technical Condition, the Entanglement of Technology, Culture and Society. Well, first question to be answered is, why did we make the book? Because there are already in existence several introductions to the philosophy of technology. So why do we need one more? Well, we thought that most introductions to the philosophy of technology implicitly or explicitly address engineering students from technical universities, which is of course logical, as the philosophy of technology was largely developed at those universities. However, we all live in technological societies, we live in technological cultures, so therefore our strong conviction is that technology is also of increasing interest for the humanities and for the social science. So therefore, we decided to make an introduction to the philosophy of technology that was geared towards students in the humanities and the social sciences. So students who can't be assumed to have already an interest in technology, but they are interested in culture, they are interested in society. So the question that we were faced with was how to make technology of interest to those target groups. The core answer to that question is that it's very easy to show that technology is always already implicated in what these students of culture and society find interesting. And to make this general point, we decided to organize the introduction around the concept of entanglement, the entanglement of technology, culture, and society. Now, entanglement is a bit of a technical term, and we define it as reciprocal constitution or interdependency. So if two entities are entangled, the idea is that they mutually shape one another and you can't separate them. So technology can't be separated from culture, can't be separated from society. Of course, analytically, we can make distinctions, but in reality, culture, society, and technology are constantly engaged in a dynamic relationship of mutual shaping. So if you want to study culture, if you want to study society, you have to look at the role of technology as technology is entangled with these entities. So the book offers chapters arguing that technology is entangled with, for example, the everyday life in the home, with the body, so think about biotechnology, but also with art, with politics, with nature, and with ethics. So if you are interested in any of these topics, the argument of the book is that you should also be interested in technology, because you simply can't understand the body, you simply can't understand art, you simply can't understand politics, you simply can't understand our relationship to nature without looking at the roles of technology. Now, I take this little scheme from chapter 4 written by Tamar, Sharon. It's on biotechnology, and it really explains, visualizes nicely how we operationalize in the book the entanglement of technology, user practices, and discourses. And the core idea is that these three entities, so things, words, practices, they all have their own agency. So technologies have agency. That's, I would say, if you have to boil down the philosophy of technology to one core message, I think this would be a plausible candidate. That the point is over and over again that technologies are not passive, neutral, docile tools or instruments, but instead they are agents that shape us. They mediate, for example, our experience of the world. They mediate how we act in the world, and we use concepts like intentionality, scripts, value ladenness, action programs. They all convey the same anti-instrumentalist message that technologies are active, creative forces in our existence. However, they have to share the stage with, for example, the users. Users are not simply the, let's say, the slaves of the technology. They also have some agency. They domesticate technologies, they reconfigure devices, they resist technologies, etc., etc. So the outcome is in the end determined by what technologies do to the users and what the users do to the technologies. And then there's a third element in that relationship, and that's language. Language, as philosophers have been pointing out in the 20th century over and over again, is not simply descriptive, it's not transparent, but language is also an agent. And if we want to stress the practical agency of language, we usually use the concept of discourse. And then we study how discourses create meaning and they shape the social world. And in the book, for example, we talk about Foucault, of course, but also we use the notion by Mary Douglas of the symbolic order, where she shows that we have a linguistically mediated relationship to our environment, where we attach meaning to the world that surrounds us, and that system of meaning she refers to as a symbolic order. Now, discourses impact the relationship between technologies and users and are impacted by that relationship too. So in the end, entanglement can be studied as the interplay of technologies, users, and discourses. And we show in the book again and again how philosophers of technology have tracked, have explored the interplay of these three types of agency. Now, entanglement it's also in the subtitle of the book, so that's the guiding motif of the book, to make sure that it's a coherent whole. However, we also use a second connecting thread, and that's the concept of a shock. Now, we had, as editors, we had a long discussion on how to make a coherent introduction. And as being trained as philosophers, we tend to think in terms of authors. And this is how you train students in philosophy. You introduce them essentially to the great thinkers. However, we could have done that, because the philosophy of technology tradition is not that long yet, but it has produced many sufficient numbers of great thinkers to fill a book. The downside of that is that such author-based introductions tend to isolate these thinkers. They become mountains of geniuses, whereas we want to show that the philosophizing about technology is essentially a social endeavor that many participate in, professionals and non-professionals. Therefore, we introduced another approach. Our book is not author-based, it's problem-based. By starting from the problems created by technology, we attempt to show that philosophy should be understood as a response to problems. Philosophers don't philosophize in thin air, but they are witnessing their time and place, and they try to make sense of the problems that they see around them, and sometimes they even come up with proposals for how to deal with those problems. But philosophy should always be understood as a grounded endeavor, located, situated in time and space, and a response to specific problems. So in our approach, we took our cue from both philosophical pragmatism and mainly Dewey, but also from phenomenology, like in the case of Heidegger. And both philosophical traditions make the point that life, practice, experience is largely unreflective. It's largely invisible. It's a matter of experiential and practical routine, and we are not aware of it. We are not aware of the specific ways we experience reality and the specific ways we engage with reality, unless our routines get disrupted. When we encounter obstacles, that can cause reflection. Yeah? And that this point is made both by pragmatism and phenomenology. And we took it as our starting point for organizing the book. So every chapter discusses a disruption in culture/society created by technology. And this is what we called technological shocks. A shock is something that disrupts experiential and practical routines and kickstarts philosophers into action, as it were. And a shock can make us aware of how our systems of meaning, how our practical routines, our social relationships are entangled with certain technologies. And then when the technologies change, then this creates space for controversy, contestation, debate, reflection on how to revise these systems of meaning and these systems of action. So, for example, just two examples that we discuss. Nowadays we see the introduction of algorithms into systems of government. What does this do to government? Government, the modern democracy in its Western form has always been tied to specific technologies like newspapers and radio and television, mass media. And nowadays we see the infusion of government with a new technology, let's call that the digitalization, and that disrupts the way we do politics and government and creates space for philosophical reflection. Same disruption we see with modern biotechnology that increasingly changes nature from something that's given, that can only be let's say changed within the rather specific limits, and now it becomes more and more malleable, makeable. And that creates space for philosophical questions. Okay, our take on the philosophy of technology. Although young, the philosophy of technology is already very broad. It's a rich tradition, and you can't cover everything in one introductory book, so you have to make choices. And we decided to concentrate on a development within the philosophy of technology that we deem is most relevant to students of the humanities and social sciences. And this means that we focus on the so-called empirical turn in the philosophy of technology. Now, to sell this empirical turn, to make sense of it, we contrast it with the past. So basically, the book is built on a fairly naive and simplified distinction between so-called classical and modern philosophy of technology, where modern philosophy starts somewhere in the 80s of the previous century. Classic philosophy of technology is already an impossible concept, because philosophy of technology has always been very diverse. So this is a construction, but we feel that for educational purposes, this is allowed. To simplify the past to highlight what you want to highlight in the present. In our simplified version of the classic philosophy of technology, the core motif is the subject-object reversal. And we show how, in the light of the Industrial Revolution and the technological shock of the Industrial Revolution, it was quite plausible, quite legitimate to start questioning how whether technology is a beneficial force or whether it's a force detrimental to the human beings. And you over and over you see this warning or this fear that somehow the machines should be our servants, but will end up as our masters. There's always the fear that we will be slaves to the machine. And that's a very recurring motif from 1850 onwards. And in philosophy of technology, this is usually referred to as the subject-object reversal. The subject should rule the object, but in reality, according to many philosophers, the object is governing the subject. The general message of the classic philosophers is that the humans should govern technology, we should rule, but, and this they show in rather pessimistic analysis, that it's questionable whether human beings will ever succeed in being on top of technology rather than being enslaved by it. There are three features that we highlight. One, classic philosophy of technology is often marked by a rather essentialist conception of technology, which highlights that technology is a project to master nature, to master human beings. So of turning nature and humans into objects. And it's driven, it's propelled forwards in its development by an insatiable thirst for more efficiency. The second feature of how technology is presented in the classic philosophy of technology is that it's often presented as in a deterministic fashion, that somehow the message is that we can't meaningfully shape the course of technology development because efficiency will always beat will always beat other values. And a third feature is that it stresses that technology is not a tool, it's not an instrument, but it's a dangerous master because it has this tendency to objectify and subjugate human beings. Now, if this is the anti-position, then there are four traditions within the philosophy of technology that together feed into what we construct as empirical turn philosophy of technology. And these four traditions are discussed in chapter 2 by Darrell Cressman. First, we have the critical, let's say, Marxist tradition, think about Feenberg. And the main question, the guiding question here is, technology could create a good life for everyone. So why hasn't it? Yeah? So this is the basic question of critical theory. And the answer is, well, basically because a few people, capitalists, harvest all the wealth and uses technology to enslave the rest, right? There's another second tradition, that's phenomenology, think Heidegger, and phenomenology is rooted in the opposition to scientism. Scientism being the claim that the only valid, but also the only valuable knowledge is scientific knowledge. And against this monopolizing of knowledge by science, phenomenology defends lived experience as being a dimension of our practical engagement with the world. And the basic message is, this is also valid and valuable knowledge. When applied to technology, we usually see two types of phenomenological questions. One, how do we experience technology? What's our lived experience of technology? Think about the famous example of Heidegger's hammer. And how, the other question is, how does technology make us experience, mediate our experience of the world, right? So how does technology lead to a specific way of disclosing the world? And think here about Heidegger's theory of technology disclosing nature in the form of a standing reserve, where we see this motif of objectification again. A third tradition that feeds into modern philosophy of technology is science and technology studies, which is interesting because science and technology studies per se are not branches of the philosophy of technology. They are, most of science and technology studies is in sociology, maybe economy and history. And they over and over show in empirical case studies how technology was and is developed, how it came to be that we end up with this technology rather than with alternative technology. And the core message of this tradition is, I would say, anti-technological determinism. Again and again and again, scholars in the science and technology studies tradition, they show that the development of technology was contingent on contextual factors, including political struggle, including power differences, including systems of cultural meaning, including values. And then last, very briefly, there's a younger tradition of the ethics of technology, which mainly materialized in the post-war period. Sorry, it says method, but period. And I think the core message there is that humans should take responsibility for their technologies. You can't hide behind the facade of technological determinism and say, we can't help it. Actually, you can and you should help it. So you should explore long-term consequences and ensure that these are not a disaster. Okay, modern philosophy of technology feeds on all these four traditions. Now, of course, it is a simplification again, but for an introduction, we feel it's legitimate to construct it in this way. So it's especially the vicinity of scholars from history, of anthropology, economy, sociology, working in science and technology studies that basically influenced modern philosophy of technology. I would say both the critical and the phenomenological tradition, and I should add here the ethical tradition too. I would say that of course, again, it's an oversimplification, but what what you see is that modern philosophy of technology breaks away from both the essentialism, let's say technology, capital T, and with the technological determinism of the founders of the philosophy of technology. What it shares, what is the continuity between classic and modern philosophy of technology, is its anti-instrumentalism. They still show that technology is an active, creative, shaping force in our society, in our culture. Okay, if you break away with essentialism, life becomes much harder, because now you can no longer sit behind your desk and formulate overarching deep conclusions about technology. You can no longer be for or against technology with a capital T. It says Y, but it should be T. The question becomes much more precise. The question becomes how to make better rather than worse technologies, or how to ensure that the technology that we make fits with society and culture through a process of probably mutual calibration, that we have to adapt some parts of the technology to be successful in society and to be culturally embraced. But what you also see is that society and culture have to adapt often to make place for the new technology. And it's exactly that process of mutual shaping, of entanglement, of mutual reciprocal calibration. That's the field, the topic of a lot of the modern philosophy of technology. So we focus on the modern philosophy of technology by writing chapters on the entanglement of how biotechnology shapes the meaning of the human body, but also the practices revolving around that body, what we can and cannot do with it, etc. But not all chapters follow this lead. We have a chapter by our chair, Pieter Lemmens, on the entanglement of technology and nature, where he introduces the notion of a technosphere, originally developed by Huff. And he says the technosphere is more like a geosphere. And actually, if you look closely, it's so complex and it's operating on such a suprahuman level that our possibilities to meaningfully engage with this technosphere and to steer it are actually quite limited. So through the notion of the technosphere, we see a rehabilitation of technological determinism, because like the classic philosophers of technology, it probably makes sense, if we think about a technosphere, to talk about this sphere as an autonomous and sphere that follows its own internal logic. So interestingly enough, in chapter 7, there's a kind of a feedback loop, self-critical into how we define modern philosophy of technology. And it's really a question whether we can solve problems like climate change and global warming, etc., by doing the empirical case studies that many philosophers of technology have engaged in over the past years. Then there's a second, however, and that's okay. I've said that the question for modern philosophy of technology is how to make better technologies, how to create better fits between technology, culture, and society. So how to, if there's always entanglement, how to be aware of that entanglement and how to shape that entanglement in a direction that we deem ethically desirable. That whole normative intent seems predicated on the existence of an ethical sphere that's autonomous vis-a-vis technological development. So it's kind of, we need to have a sphere where we say, okay, these are the values that we go for. Now let's see how we build those values into technology, or how do we create technology that serves those values. And in the last chapter, we complicate that somewhat instrumentalistic take on technology development by introducing the notion of techno-moral change, the entanglement of technology and ethics. That on the one hand, we show that ethics is not new to technology development, but has always been part of it. But nowadays, it's more explicit, it's more conscious in the form, for example, of responsible research and innovation or value-sensitive design. And so we show that ethicists or humanists, they are collaborating with engineers in this endeavor to create better technology. But on the other hand, we also have to be aware that our ethical orientations, our values, they don't float in thin air. They are part of the culture, part of the societies that we inhabit, which means that they must also, if we take entanglement seriously, our values, our ethics is also co-shaped by technology. And therefore, ethics can't be understood to be an independent sphere vis-a-vis the technology that it means to assess. So technology and ethics or morality are mutually shaping each other. And we end this with, not by saying, let's give up the idea that you can ethically guide technology development, but probably we'll have to devise new ways that provide more space to the imagination. Okay, are we happy with the book? Yes. Are we 100% happy? Never. Because everything that is produced is always a compromise between your dreams and reality. And we feel that there are still omissions in the book. So if there's ever going to be a second edition, there's at least one chapter I would really like to add. We tried to get this, but we failed. We dearly miss a chapter on technology in non-Western countries. If you talk about the entanglement of technology with culture and society, then there's no better way to illustrate that, to show that the same technology is operating differently, is shaped differently, is developing differently in a different cultural and societal context. So that's the chapter that unfortunately still needs to be written. Thank you for your attention. I leave this slide on, and this will give you an idea of what the book has to offer. And now I'm looking forward to our critics.
Thanks a lot, Tsjalling, for this excellent introduction. I think you managed to get a lot of things, a lot of the messages of the book across very clearly. So thank you for that. Our first respondent is Steven Dorrestijn from Saxon University. Please, Steven, take the floor.
Okay. So can you understand me? I'm loud and clear.
Yes, I can at least. So
Okay.
please
Well,
continue.
Well, congratulations with the US editors with this nice book. And thank you for inviting me for a reaction to your book in this session. When I accepted, I said, well, it is on a pretty short term. I'm not sure if I will be able to read all of it, but I have. So it's readable because I could do this in 2 weeks, in hours here and there. And I read it with overall with pleasure. So that's the first thing. Congratulations. And now I have, let's say 4 points to talk about. And then if there's time, I can also go over the individual chapters and say something about it or raise my most prominent question or reaction. Yeah, but we'll see. But first about entanglement and shock. I definitely like the idea of putting shock so center stage. So to start philosophizing about technology from the unsettlement, from a shock, a disruption. So that's other words that you could use, and you do that in the book. Disruption, worry, concern. And of course, it makes think of a classical distinction made by Heidegger between Zuhanden, Vorhanden, or another very famous notion of technologies as black box, and the black box now and then gets opened, made famous by Latour, but I think also again in 2015 by Frank Pascal in the context of digitalization, surveillance. And I think it's a nice way of making a transition from everyday normal experience of living in a technological culture to a reflection about this from the unsettlement. So I like that. And it is it becomes very clear in your book that when you start thinking about technology and not just taking it for granted as a black box or as normal, then everybody who starts thinking about technology comes to the conclusion that technology is not neutral, whereas that may be our everyday conception. But thinking about technology, one of the essential or the central first general conclusions is technology has impact, has agency, is not neutral. And that brings me to the second word in your central scheme of shock and entanglement, entanglement. I also like entanglement. It's a simple and nice concept. In your introduction, Tsjalling, you said it's maybe a bit of a technical term, but then you came up with a series of other words, and those were much more technical. So entanglement is more or less simple and clear. Other words often used in philosophy of technology are more complicated. And I think I immediately thought of the notion of technical mediation. You use it in the word, in the book, but it's not a central concept. So as sometimes it is, but it's a difficult word. I don't think that everybody can immediately understand what mediation would mean. Entanglement is simpler. And therefore, in a sense, it's more accessible. One of my promoters was Peter Beek, and he's famous for putting this word, the word of technical mediation, central. But he's not the only one. It's a word used a lot by many authors, also by Bruno Latour, by Don Eide, by Andrew Feenberg, and Marshall McLuhan, and many others use this notion of mediation. Technology fulfills a function, brings us to our goals, helps us reaching our goals, but it does more things. That's the meaning of mediation. This functionality is much more complex. It does unexpected things, etc. But another, so the impact of technology is then one, aspect of this notion of mediation, but the other equally important aspect is the notion of entanglement as you use it, and of co-constitution, the more difficult word that you then used, and etc. So entanglement made me think of mediation, but in a sense it's simpler and more accessible. The notion of entanglement as you then use it in the book, in the structure of the book, in the sense of entanglement of technology and something else, and the bridge to other domains, or the entanglement with other things, made me also think very much of the structure of the big philosophical book of Bruno Latour, his inquiry into modes of existence. So that's another link that made me think of that also. And for Latour, it is you could say it's all about entanglements of different domains, different modes of existence in his terms. And technology is one of those domains. And what you then do in your book, if you compare it to his framework, is writing solely on the link of this domain of technology to some other domains. Whereas Latour links all domains to all other domains. And this linkage that you make of technology to some domains is one of his topics. But then again, you see, the framework of Latour is very, very difficult. It's not accessible to most people. It's 12 modes of existence that could cross with all the other domains. So 12 times 12 is, that's too difficult for me. So the crossings of modes of existence is also something that I recognize in your book, but in a more or less accessible way. And I like that. And then we come to the structure of your book. So the structure is entanglement of technology with health, with nature, with governance. And for those 3 chapters, it works perfectly, I think. It works also for the others, but maybe a little bit less so. So I had a little bit more difficulty in seeing this nice interlinkage crossing with everyday life. It works, but a little bit more artificial, I found, when I read it. And with art, the same. And then another question is, did you miss some important domains? You yourself brought up non-Western countries, technology in non-Western countries. I had to think of one prominent domain that is missing. It would be digitalization, artificial intelligence, algorithms, etc. This is a very, very important domain in philosophy of technology, and it has not a chapter of its own. It is not discussed as such. Most so in the chapter on everyday life. With, for example, the case of Amazon Alexa. And that's a nice case in the chapter. And in a way...
And the government chapter by Kraak and Meacham on algocracy?
Yeah, there's also, yeah, definitely. There's also, it's also part on the chapter on technology and governance. That's true. Yeah. So it's there, but it's not as prominent as you would maybe expect if you look around today. What is prominent topics in philosophy of technology? And then you have a chapter on morality totally at the end. And I think that the second half of the chapter really works as a conclusion of the book. But in a way, I thought that the first part of the chapter could have been equally well, or maybe even better, at the beginning of the book, together with the introduction and the history of philosophy of technology book. Let's say as to explain the framework. So if that would be the case, then you would have introduction to philosophy and ethics of technology at the beginning, and then the domains. Another thing on the structure, that a reaction on when I read it is that especially for the chapter on history and the introduction, there is some overlap in a way. It could have been one chapter, or it could have been tuned even better to each other. Is that a bad thing? Is it a problem? I'm not sure, but it did. Yeah, what it is. This is my reaction. It did come to my mind in reading through the book. I do, in a way, I do definitely like your idea to base the chapters on problems and not on authors. And you wrote together with different authors. You could have written it by yourself. One of you could have written on the whole philosophy of technology, author-based or problem-based, but you wrote problem-based and with different authors. That is nice because you see different things, but the integration is good, but not perfect. There is also repetition, and there is again and again, everybody has to link to this scheme of entanglement and shock, but then again you get another explanation of the scheme, etc. It's good but not perfect. That would be my conclusion about that. So that was about the book. Now I have a totally different kind of question. Could I fit in the book? Could I fit in this framework? Is it interesting for me? Do I like it after all? And then the question, the way to test that is, could I fit into it? My own work is very much, my basic scheme is very much the two words of impact and concern about the impact. The impact of technology, research into the impact of technology, and ethical reflection or concern about the impact. And if you seen from the ethics of technology, that it would mean it's ethics of technology, ethical reflection on concern about technology, starting from an analysis of the impact. Well, this connects very well to your, rather well to your scheme of entanglement and shock. It's not the same, but yeah, but that is probably why I do like it. I even have if I ever would have time, I would elaborate that scheme of impact and concern. Maybe I would build it up more a little bit to condition and aspirations, conditions and aspirations. Well, it happens that these two terms are also in your book. At least 2 times, you would also write about ethics as that's about what we aspire as humans in our lives and with technology. And technology as an important part of what conditions us is even in the title. So that fits. Then another aspect in my own work in philosophy of technology is what I with Wouter Eggink, I saw that he was in the audience. So Wouter and me, we at some point said that our kind of work would be a kind of a practical turn in philosophy of technology. So after the empirical turn that you explained, from more classical philosophy of technology with capital T to a more case studies and concrete technologies, more micro scale, has been an important shift in the method of doing philosophy of technology. And we thought that it would also be worth to make another turn, or to add another dimension to this turn in making philosophy of technology practical, meaning not only doing empirical studies about technology, but be more part of the technology developing process. Well, this is very much, by the way, also in your book, when you would write about philosophy of technology as guidance in technology development. So here and there it's present. But Wouter and me, what we like is also to make a translation of insights from philosophy of technology into tools that everybody, students, professionals, can apply. And in that way, without studying a lot of theory, still can do something in line with philosophy of technology. They can do reflection on technology by themselves or with help, but guided by practical methods and tools, and not by studying a lot of books. Well, that is missing a little bit in your book. That's not so much. Only in the very last chapter, when you, Tsjalling, I think, write about scenarios, and Federica knows everything about it. There it's very close to this kind of practical approach, a practical turn in philosophy of technology. As Pieter Lemmens mentioned, that one part of my work was a product impact tool, which I maintain again with Wouter Eggink, by the way. And yeah, that's also an attempt to make philosophy of technology practical, accessible to students, professionals, everybody, without much theoretical study. And now I work in a school for higher vocational programs. And there I've discovered that even that framework with 12 types of impact, 12 levels of impact of technology on people is often too difficult. So the newest tool is, when I talk with engineers, I call it an ethical readiness check, because they often talk about technological readiness level. But it's questioning means and ends. That's all. So it starts from the very, very simple scheme of means and ends. And you, as philosopher of technology, can maybe ask, yeah, but are you not too close to the idea that technology is neutral? I don't think so. It's a scheme that everybody knows, means and ends. Technology is associated with means and ethics more with ends. But yeah, then the next thing is, from philosophy of technology, we learn that technology is not neutral. So the concepts are blurred. And it's the first question would be, this innovation that we now have here at hand, is it for a good means? Is it for a good end, I mean? Is it, yeah? And the second question is it a good means for the end? But then there are sub-questions, and the sub-questions can be attuned to a specific project, etc. So we have different variations on this very, very simple two questions. Yeah, at some point, not in this session, but before, I was also asked, do you think that this book could be useful for education at schools for vocational education? Yes and no. I think it's yes, for if you want to teach theories and talk about teach about the history and currents in philosophy of technology and themes with the chapters on specific domains. But I also think that my own students here would think it's pretty thick, and there's too much in the chapters. Another compliment for Pieter Lemmens. I think this is the chapter by you is I liked it very much, and it's very accessible for compared to the kind of work you do. Huh? But is it easy for HBO students in the Netherlands, for students in vocational education? I'm not sure. Huh? So that was what I had to say, and now I can say something about individual chapters and put some questions, or I can stop. That depends on the time.
Well, there's still time for you to
raise a few questions. Do it yes. Pretty fast.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Then that could be things then to really talk about. And now this was a discourse, and now I will say a few things more precise on more details, and that are really questions that you can also answer. Yeah, I read the chapters by Swierstra, but also heard his introduction just. So there's the questions about the reaction to Tsalling work is both on the presentation and on the book chapters. You emphasize very much that the book is in the tradition, in the new current of the empirical turn. And you made the point of it, and also that the chapter by Lemmens fits less or least into that framework. But actually, I did not notice that so much. I did not think that the book is, that this framework of empirical turn is so prominent throughout the book. So I didn't see that as a problem at all. And instead of defending the empirical turn, I am then, although I know exactly what it is about, I'm also very much in favor of a return of big questions of the last 10 or 15 years. I don't see a problem. And I've never also when I was a student, I did not see why you had to defend or choose for an empirical turn, and that would mean that you had totally to distance yourself from past philosophy of technology or the bigger tradition. I don't see why you have to do away with Heidegger and Ellul to engage in more empirical work. I thought it's interesting to have both, and concrete studies that also give the opportunity to work together with engineers and to change something in real life, but against the background of the big questions and reflections. And then the title. So the book is on. Throughout the book you have the scheme of entanglement and shock. Why is it not in the title? I think it would have been a nice title as well, because the word of the technical condition, it's not so prominent in the book. So that's a very concrete question. How did that come about? And then
there's a very concrete answer to that, but I will give it to you later.
Okay. Now, I liked the first introductory chapter on the history of not on the history, but on the introduction. I think it overlaps a little bit with the second chapter. But I really liked the first chapter. It was accessible, a nice read. In that chapter, there's also the framework that it is entanglement of technology and society and culture. But I see you wrestling a little bit with all those three terms. Where sometimes you make it short and you say society and then you say culture, and then after a while I was not sure what you meant with the exact three terms. So yeah, that was as a reader, it's a long formulation and made things maybe more complicated than necessary. The second chapter, presented as a history of technology, is hardly that, because it's also presenting four approaches, as you also presented by Cressman. The third chapter by Codina, I said something about it. Oh yeah, because I thought it was a little bit more difficult to see the notion of entanglement with a domain working here. But still, and in that chapter, I personally liked the framework that is only introduced in more or less in the conclusion. That is taken partly from Foucault, and that's also where I have expertise. As I would say, there's this tension between technologies that can be part of disciplinary power, but it can also be part of self-care of people. That's an interesting scheme that I find interesting and would work perfectly for technology in everyday life. But in the chapter first is introduced the notion of language games by Wittgenstein. Also interesting. A fourth chapter by Sharon. Swierstra, Tsjalling Swierstra, you introduced some of the notions that she uses in that chapter. And there you see that what happens with so many authors, you try to work from the same scheme, but also every author brings in his own schemes on top of that. And whereas you liked the triple scheme of Sharon, of technology, practice, and discourse. In a way, I do like it, but I think that, well, for the students here, it would be too difficult. So it is a little bit complicated. But still, I like it, and the chapter overall, I also like it. And of course, technology, philosophy of technology in the crossing with health is very important domain. And the fifth chapter, I didn't write down who wrote it. It's by Vage, Nora Vage, on art. I liked it. I have. Well, most of people here know Peter Kokkelkoren, who wrote on art and technology and philosophy of technology in a little bit different way. But what was nice in this chapter is also that it gave an overview of some important traditions or thinkers on art and philosophy of technology. So that was, whereas I'm a little bit know a little bit of this topic, I found new things here as well. The chapter on technology and governance, when reaching the conclusion, I liked the chapter very much. In the very beginning, I was a bit troubled because the opening sentence so confused me, or no, surprised me, when it said that technology and politics it's actually the same. There's hardly a difference between technology and politics. That I found surprising. But in the course of the chapter, I've learned to appreciate what they mean. And overall, I like the chapter, and also that it is historical. And as you say, it's true. This is about the impact of digitalization on governance and democracy today, but against the background of technological / governance revolutions in the past. So we're almost there. Then there's the chapter on the crossing of technology and nature. I already said that I liked it a lot. I really liked it. I found it one of the nicest chapters in the book. Maybe Federica is saying more about it, then I'll leave it here. And the chapter on morality, that I found interesting to read as well, because in my own work I've written on technology and ethics in a different way, although it's the same field, but still in a different way. And techno-moral change is a notion that you, Tsjalling Swierstra, have put forward. Other people have done things in a similar way after you or contemporary with you. So they've written on moral change or moral mediation, well, especially relating to the last term on moral mediation by Peter Lemmens, that I know very well. But his mediation approach I liked in the beginning, but the way how Peter Lemmens connects technology and ethics and technology and morality and technology and politics, there I take a very different approach, and I'm much closer to what was in this chapter. So I liked it a lot. And so that would be then the last thing I say. It's that in this chapter, and also in the chapter by Lemmens, there is problematization of the notion of entanglement, that everything is entangled, but it doesn't mean that you would not want to make any difference at all between what we think and want and what technology does to us. And and that's an interesting critical question in the philosophy of technology of today, and that also comes forward in the book.
Thanks a lot, Stephen, for your very interesting and perceptive assessment of the book, and for these great questions, which we hope to answer. But first, let's give the floor to Federica Lucivero on her views on this book. The floor is yours, Federica.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Tsalling and Stephen. So thank you, first of all, for inviting me to be part of this panel, because this invitation forced me to actually take the time to read this book that I liked a lot. And I have to disclose that I have a bit of a thing for handbooks because they are not pretentious, because you can really see what authors are concerned about, and they really, you know, try to be clear to the point instead of trying to show off their readings, their knowledge, their acumen. References are kept at the bay, and they really make an effort in simplifying and like seeing trends. As Tsjalling was saying, of course, trends and simplifications, especially like for philosophers, can be a problem. At the same time, they are very helpful, not only for students, I would say. And that's what I liked about the book. I not only enjoyed this, you know, the way it was constructed, but also helped me in thinking and kind of simplifications. I think also, and when I say simplifications, I don't want to say that the book is overly simplified, but when of course, as Tsjalling was saying, some decisions need to be made in order to be clear, in order to explain things clearly and so on. And I think it has a value not only for educational purposes, but also for thinking purposes. So again, like, thank you for you know, making me take the time to get, you know, to get the space and time to read this. And it was difficult, and it's difficult. So it was difficult and easy to comment on the book. And it was difficult because this is pretty much the philosophy of technology tradition I've been formed in, and that I kind of it's part of my training, it's part of my background. So it's hard because I feel like very much in it. At the same time, it's easy because you already know what are the issues with you know, that you're with the questions that you always receive, and the issues that you know you haven't quite solved. So in that sense, I felt that I could bring here some of the questions that maybe I have for myself, and hoping that we can just engage in a discussion on them. So, and some of the points I think have been that I wanted to discuss have been raised by Stephen, but anyways, I'll try to engage with some of the things that Stephen said as I speak. And I basically want to make two main I want to discuss two main things. And one is about the role of the philosopher, and I'll take like in the whether we call it technosphere or we talk this kind of entanglement, but what is the role of the philosopher? And then another theme like that Tsjalling mentioned that is not directly addressed in the book, but may require attention. It's definitely like worth a discussion, at least some self-awareness, which is how much contemporary philosophy of technology is very much based kind of Western philosophy, and whether there is a need, and apologies for using like the D word that sometimes is overused. But it's a very important word, is whether there is a need to decolonize philosophy of technology. I don't know how the word is used in the Netherlands, but in the UK, I can assure you there is like a big thrive for good reasons, but often, you know, you may wonder how much this is used for rhetorical purposes, but we'll get to that. So let me start like reflecting on the question about the role of the philosopher. Which I think it's a key theme that also Tsjalling has kind of addressed in his introduction today. And you know, I think it's interesting to think like about that in terms of terms, as also Stephen has pointed out. So as in chapter 1 and chapter 2 is clearly discussed, philosophers haven't always been interested in thinking about technology. And as philosophy was something like too material, and it is like was not worth it of philosophical reflection, whether philosophers were more interested in topics of of knowledge, more of like theoretical contemplation. Things start to change with Protestantism and the appreciation of work, the scientific revolution, and definitely became a central concern with Industrial Revolution, as Tsjalling said, where it was kind of this shock of the Industrial Revolution. And as the preponderant, the technology becomes like a very central in the management of work and ordinary life. So we see that more and more philosophers see technology as a part of the human condition that is entangled with it, whether we talk about human condition or culture or society. But this concept again of entanglement, I think I agree with Stephen. It's good, it's powerful. We can explore the entanglement of what, but it does give a sense of this knot, this very tight knot, and this interdependence. So philosophers see technology as part of the human condition, and they try to make sense of it, right? This is again like a turn towards technology, like a turn in the focus of the philosophical side turns toward technology. Again, as the book clearly says, and we all know, it's not something that just happened at some point, and it's complicated. But at the same time, we do see this focus and how this focus on technology becomes, this interest in technology becomes more prominent. And so what really technologies, philosophical technologies do is like trying to make sense of the entanglement of the human condition, the technological artifact, the social structures and moral values. And this is really what I saw as the answer, kind of the direct answer to my question that I could find in the book. This is what philosophy of technology does, tries to make sense of this entanglement, tries to uncovering the assumptions, uncover the relationship, explore the meaning really of this, but also try really to address what the problems, what the shock is about. And or as like in Stephen's word, like opening, well, as Stephen like pointed out, it's not Stephen's word, but opening like this black box. So this is kind of this hermeneutic role that I see as like clearly something that many philosophical technologies try to do, and is kind of how this is described in the role of the philosophy described in the book. So again, making connection, making sense. But as I kept on reading, there was something else that emerged. And it's nice also, like I was, I also how Stephen pointed out, of course, as when we are working on an edited book, there are some authors bring some parts at some other point of the book, and it's interesting how you brought up, Tsjalling, this this like the idea of entanglement as an entanglement between discourses, practices and technologies as like three entities having agency that is described by Tamar, Sharon in chapter 4. And it is really, and I was also wondering to what extent this is like the, it's the something that was brought up as like in a second point, kind of as an afterthought, or was like really key in the book. And I do think that in a way, and I appreciate that you discussed it in the introduction, because I think, even if it was introduced in chapter 4, it's still part of this concept of, it's very much talks about this concept of entanglement. But what I found interesting is that it really, to me, it really spoke about an entanglement of methods in thinking about what philosophers of technology do. And I thought, like, here what we see is what I saw were like also like not only three entities, but I saw like three disciplines, or three, like, as I said, like three probably methods, that's I should say. So like looking at technologies, like the material aspects of technologies, this uncovering, this is like something that we see a lot done in science and technology studies, where the material aspects of the technology, as well as its interaction with actors, like social actors, is really part of the way we you look at the technology. But at the same time, how you borrow methods from, like discourse analysis, more kind of sociological approaches, as well, of course, as some philosophical traditions, where you look at dominant discourses and way language is used to make meanings, but also, as it's pointed out, to do things, to how language has an agency. And so again, I was thinking about this lens that I use when I look at the technology, and then when I look at promises, expectations, or kind of the rhetoric that accompanies the technological innovation or artifact. And then there is this third aspect that comes, I think, like from the field of anthropology or sociology, but like the idea of doing like ethnography, is the idea of looking at what happens when users, and again, it's full of like science and technology studies. Of course, these are all like very interdisciplinary. I mean, it's not all comes from a discipline, but I was thinking about how this really spoke to me, but it spoke to the difficulty that I have when I try to think about my kind of disciplinary background, and when I think about the tools that I use, the methods that I use to address this type of questions. And another thing that made me think about is how, of course, when you use all these methods, you also change not only like the focus, the way you approach things, but also sometimes really the question that you are asking. So as I think, first the philosophers like broaden the focus and like focus on technology. Then it's a broadening in the methods, but also. When you start really engage with discourses, when you start engaging with practices, when you start engaging with technological artifacts, you ask the question again. It's a question that was there already in more. In other traditions in philosophy, but you are the questions on how to make it better, how to not only explore the meaning, not only make sense of things, but also how to guide practice. And this is something that Stephen referred to as the practical turn, and it's clearly like described in the last chapter, where basically there is this where the aspect of how philosophy, what is the where basically asking myself the question of how philosophy of technology relate to ethics, to politics, to design. You talked about value-sensitive design, responsible research and innovation, constructive technology assessment, and the question is really how we go from that exploration of the problem, that unpacking, to a guidance, to a driving, to a steering towards what we think is desirable, and how we do it in a context where our own values, as Tsjalling highlights, are evolve and change are shaped by technology. Is this entanglement dangerous in that sense, because it doesn't let us really it doesn't let us really like think freely, and also like outside of the technology box. So the question here for me was a question, first of all, of division of labor. So are we saying that, and I kind of can imagine the question, but like I want to, like as a provocation, I want to pose it, but are we saying that philosophy of technology is about exploring the problems while other disciplines and other approaches, like if ethics of technology is a different approach, is trying to steering things, going like towards more like in a practical, towards like kind of practical turn, to borrow Stephen's word, but also what this practical turn is and should be about. Is it about developing tools to actually go in those directions, or is it a risk also of kind of rubber stamping and kind of losing the critical stance that philosophers of technologies have traditional, or in most cases had? So is the practical turn also about resistance, also about activism, and how do we justify that? And here I just want to end this reflection with the Peter's chapter, and the reflection on what is the the reflection on the need for radical change in a context where according, again, and the chapter does a very good job in showing like the different approaches to how we should think about the Anthropocene and the possible consequences of it. But at the same time, it does pose a question about this kind of more activist and more critical role that we may want to take as at this point, I'm not sure whether I should say like as philosopher of technologies, but in general, like as people interested in this relationship. So again, is it like a new condition? Is it a new turn, this kind of turn towards resistance and towards like activism? This is something that as a person that, as Stephen, often works, I work in population health, in a department of population health, and I work with health data scientists who, by the way, I think would love some of this chapter, especially, in that case, because of the content, the chapter 4 could really speak to them. But sometimes I wonder, when I talk to them, and some of them end up saying like, okay, maybe we should change, maybe I should not do a project on health data science, and these are the PhD students, and I do realize that that's not the direction I want them to take. Of course, I want to assist them and support them in bringing their, in taking their projects to the best possible realization. But at the same time, I wonder whether yes, maybe I should also have this activist role of being less complacent, of buying less of this kind of technologically driven dream. And I realized maybe I spoke a little bit longer than anticipated, and I'll just make a very quick point about this. Because I actually probably I don't have myself much to add, if not a reflection of how this book, but I would say again, I take it also as a self-criticism. In my work, I'm mostly very focused on kind of Western accounts of philosophy, like Western philosophies, and I just want to bring your attention to two authors and two types of works that actually have challenged that. One is the one from Pak Wang, and who like few years ago, again, he was also like part of the 20 team at the time, and he really discussed how we can learn from non-Western philosophical tradition. And in this context, in his case, he focused on exploring the remits of a Confucian ethics of technology. So we can learn from Confucian philosophy and what can we bring in thinking about like philosophy of technology. So this is one way of thinking about, you know, whether we are kind of too narrow in thinking about, you know, in thinking about the traditions of philosophy of technology, and whether, you know, we can expand that. But there is another aspect, and here I want to bring the work of Cristiano Cordero Cruz, who recently published in Philosophy of Technology, and he talks about the need to decolonize philosophy of technology. And as I was saying before, this can be like it is a complex concept, and his paper is complex. It's not necessarily an easy read, but it's a very important, he makes a very, very important point on how it's not just about, it is not just about like taking other philosophical traditions, but it's also about like looking at other technological innovation, other ways of looking at technology from the way that middle class white people living in high income countries would do. And I think, I mean, there are more and more like, but very often these are case studies. I don't think there is an overall approach to, and to really take into account that technology is not just what we experience, like, and what we see as technological innovation in Europe, in the States, but there are other kind of ways of thinking about technologies. And again, this is more of a provocation for me. This is not necessarily, I mean, I'm definitely like not an expert on this, but I think this is something that it's important to discuss in a context of you know, like a book on philosophy of technology. So I just wanted to bring it to your attention. And believe I'm up with my time. I had like lots of ideas and thoughts when Stephen was talking, but I think I'll leave it to this now, and then we can, you know, have, you know, discuss it with the audience as well.
Yeah, thank you a lot, Federica, for your also very perceptive remarks. Yeah, we have a lot of questions already. There's only one question yet filed from the Q&A section, but maybe I should give the floor first back again to Tsjalling. There are enough questions to pick from, I would say.
Yes, but
yeah. Oh.
Okay, there's one question that's very easy to answer, but it's also a pain point. Stephen said, why not a title with entanglement in it? Well, basically because the book took a long time to make, and all the brochures had this title, and after that we developed in our editorial meetings this new focus, etc. And then we tried to change the title, but then we were strongly discouraged by the publisher. Said no, because now everyone will be confused. So unfortunately, we are stuck with this title. Now, let's hope it covers sufficiently. I also see that Olya Kudina is in the audience, and she's the author of chapter 3. So maybe she wants to answer to Stephen first. Then we can also introduce another author of the book. Is that an idea, Peter?
Yeah, although I'm not sure whether Olya can come online like with her voice, with the mic. I don't think so, actually, Edwin. But she had a question at the beginning, but then deleted it, which was more practical, I think, about the usefulness of our book for engineers. But I'm not sure. Maybe, Olya, are you still there? And could you maybe respond via?
Yes, I'm there. I'm here.
Yeah, and Olya, I don't think I can join from the participant mode. So that's
okay.
unfortunately impossible.
Okay.
Yeah, I can give him to talk.
Sorry?
I can give Kudia to talk.
Olya Kudina. Olya Kudina. It's okay, and it's a green.
So I allow him or her to talk, right?
Yes, please.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, that's great.
Okay, she's permitted to talk now.
Okay. Hi, Olja.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, Tsalling, and for the discussion from Steven and Federica. But I apologize, I don't remember the exact question. I think Steven did make a few comments about the chapter, but I didn't really write down the question. So if you want to repeat it, I will try to, on the spot, come up with an answer as best as I can.
Can you repeat it, Steven, or?
Yeah, but in this case, on this particular chapter, I had some comments, but not really one question. Not
no, but I think you asked how the entanglement motif was present in this chapter.
Yeah, but I didn't ask it in the form of a question. I just said in some chapters it worked naturally, and in this case a little bit less. But yeah, I don't know if Olja had something to add after some of the things that I said. Do you want to highlight something of your chapter? Or?
No, I really appreciate also the the effort that you took to review the chapter, and I think you, based on your comments, I saw you really read it quite in depth, so I appreciate that. And I think you're right. I mean, I mostly was concerned with working from the framework of shocks, and that was a new framing for me, and that was something that was really also difficult to sort of look as an analytic thread throughout the work, and to look at shocks also as a way to study the entanglement between technology and morality. So maybe because of the bias on trying to focus on shocks, the framework of entanglement sort of slipped away. So that is, I completely admit to that shortcoming. Perhaps that's something that I would be, that I can take up further in the work. But with the rest, I really agree and appreciate all the comments. And also, may I say that I'm a big fan of your work on Foucault and subjectivation. That's just another side note.
Oh, well,
so maybe Olja's chapter made us aware that of let's say, interesting question. Can there be unobserved shocks? Can there be shocks that are not experienced as such, but are only shocks because the philosopher says so? Because you can say that the way that people embraced voice assistants like Alexa didn't create huge ripples, and people were not shocked in any subjective sense. Still, from a philosophical perspective, you could argue that this introduced an important new agent into the household. If people are, that's another example that I really like from Olja's chapter. She describes how if you have a Roomba, a robot Hoover, that you have to do a lot of preparatory work to allow this robot to serve you. So first you serve the robot, and then the robot can serve you. You have to clean up your room, maybe your house shouldn't have stairs, etc. So there's a lot of invisible work. And it's a very interesting form of, you could say, entanglement, but it's probably not perceived as such by the human actors. And so the question is, so what, that maybe, let's say the assumption was that philosophers respond to shocks, but philosophers can also be the authors of claims about that actually this is a shock, even if no one notices it. So that complexifies the reasoning somewhat, and I was made aware of that by reading Olja's chapter.
Yeah. Stephen, did you want to respond to that? I saw your...
Yeah, I like the theme a lot. And I think that in general, the philosophy of technology has always made a warning call that nobody wanted to hear. Thus, in a way, it's also very present, the thing that you said that you only just discovered, Tsjalling. And in the chapter, for people who did not yet read it, it's very interesting. So the Roomba, and the other thing was the Amazon Alexa, that people actually start talking in a different way because Alexa wants to hear things in a certain way, and otherwise doesn't understand you. And I had the exact same experience with a car, with a speech recognition system in a car. I could make a phone call to my mother from the car, but then in my address book it said pa en ma in Dutch, father and mother, pa en ma, but the system didn't understand it. Only I had to say pa en ma. So Dutch language will change to pa en ma from pa en ma if we have speech recognition everywhere. And indeed,
and there's an
very, very nice. In the philosophy of technology in everyday life, I think there's a very prominent theme that it's about everyday technologies that we hardly notice. Only certain people have the ability to make things clearer or to bring things out. And that's also Bruno Latour's, his philosophy of very mundane artifacts. And other people, anthropologists who write on everyday handling of technologies, and only when they write about it you think, yes, actually it's remarkable, but I had never thought about it this way.
There's actually an interesting tale to Olja's chapter, and that's this week I read that Alexa and other voice assistants are increasingly considered to be technological failures. And that, for example, Alphabet, etc., is no longer investing in further developing it. And this probably has to do with the fact that we have to adapt so much to the voice assistant that it's not worth the effort. And after a year, then the novelty value wanes, and then it ends up on the shelf. This is also a problem with creating a book like this, because you describe, you want it to be up to date. You don't want to write about Google Glass, because Google Glass is, hey, yesterday, so my students don't even know what it is anymore. So, okay, this is today. But in a year or two, your examples are maybe completely outdated. I'm still using the example of quantified self, because I thought that was going to be big. But actually, it's really a fringe phenomenon. So it's difficult to have good examples, I find. Yeah, it's easy to get outdated. Okay, the role of the philosopher, that was the point that Federica raised, and that you now, Stephen, also pick up. Federica, I was listening carefully. You don't suggest anything, right? It's just a question. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, yes, it is. Go ahead.
Yeah. Maybe the question is wrong in the sense that there can be different roles of the philosopher, and I think there's a lot of it depends a lot on what kind of relationship you're in. If you write a government report on a new emerging technology, mapping the ethical concerns, that's a different role than being the embedded humanist in the laboratory, trying to nudge your engineering colleagues to further reflection. And that's something else than to write an opinion piece in a newspaper. I must say that I think where our strength is in, and that's what Stephen said, and that he took it from Latour, and Latour probably took it from Foucault. Some things are invisible because they're right below our noses, and it's always very gratifying, I feel, as a philosopher of technology, to point out the obvious to the people who are working with it, are living with it, are interacting with it, but don't realize that, for example, the extent to which they are shaped by the technology. So again, the Roomba example, it's it's not something radically new to point out that people first have to clean their rooms before the Roomba can do its job. But if you point out that it's not only there to serve you, but it actually makes you do invisible work, there's always this aha moment. And I think that's something that we are particularly good at. And I'm not sure it's tied to either grand questions or empirical turn. I think we can draw on all these traditions to have those observations. So that would be my take on it.
And we, if I may, Federica also talked about the notion of guidance and even activism. And I was wondering, how far does the authority of philosophers extent? I'm remembered of Gilbert Hautois always saying that, you know, these philosophers have no symbolic authority at all, and they should not be allowed to guide engineers and technologists. They should simply symbolically accompany this process, whatever that may mean. But how do you see that guidance and even activism in front of you, Federica? What?
Well, I think, as Tsalling said, it's a matter of the different roles, and this is probably really what I'm after, and kind of acknowledging these three different roles that philosophy of technology can have, because I agree with Tsjalling that I would say what is acknowledged as the main role would be like this kind of making sense and like seeing the obvious and so on. At the same time, we do see many people who would consider themselves, and that's another thing, is like the self-perceptions, whether you are a philosopher of technology, you consider yourself as a philosopher of technology, or you learn from philosophy of technology, it doesn't really matter, I think. The point is, you know, you've talked about different traditions, and you can see it from the disciplinary point of view. I talked about different methods, or you can talk about different roles. But the point is that I don't even think we need to define, or we need to find like an identity that is, you know, that has to exclude one of these roles. But I think it is important to acknowledge that this identity is diverse. And yes, it can also, and I think I more and more think that it's, you know, coming from also myself, I'm from a more pragmatist tradition, and I would, you know, when Tsjalling asked, is this a question or did you propose a direction? It's like, no, of course I'd only ask questions, because I would never, I'm not, you know, the personality thing. It's just like, I wouldn't be able to say, okay, that's what we should do, and that's what we need to do, and how we guide. That's not what I do, but I start more and more to ask myself the question whether you know, it would be fine if I took a more practical role, a more guiding role in some cases, or a more activist role, like, which is even more extreme. And the question is, do philosophers have the authorities? No, but who has the authority of being an activist? Who has the authority of guiding? As far as I see it, I mean, you can also question like whether policymakers have that authority and that legitimation, where it comes from, you know, in a context where, you know, chapter 6, you know, explores that how also kind of the way of thinking about political legitimations need to be revisited. So no, that maybe we don't have the authority, but why do we have to have the authority? Isn't that one of the roles that that is still part of, I think, kind of the philosophy of technology endeavor? And again, if you think about like more critical theories and so on, but maybe we have got like a little bit shy, and you know, it's part of the anti-foundationalist approach and so on, and more postmodern approaches. But you see, didn't we go back to that and, you know, like a guide or being active without really thinking or believing that we need to have the authority to do that? And again, it's an open question. As I said, this is more like kind of disclosing some of the thoughts that I'm having for myself that were definitely like triggered by the book. But yes, I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah, our strength is indeed maybe in the reflexive, enlightening, critical hermeneutic capability that we have on board, and but not, I think, in the guiding sense. There are two questions from the audience, and so I also want to give them the opportunity to ask them. One relates a bit to this question: is how can the philosophers give impact on the production people? Maybe we can do that very briefly, because there's another question on another important topic on non-Western philosophy of technology and non-Western tech philosophers as writers. But maybe very briefly, how can the philosophers give impact on the production people? Who was feels?
Well, maybe I can open the discussion there. Let's say our starting point was that most philosophy of technology is conducted very close to the production people. So it's located in engineering or technical universities. It's often part of the same money stream, that you have a technological project and then there's an ethics work package and they have to collaborate, etc. So the assumption was that you have to influence the production people by adding a philosopher to the team, which is fine, which can work, but it's certainly not the only way. I think the basic starting point of this book was that you have to educate the whole society into a notion of technological citizenship, even if you're not an engineer. Yeah. And in this way, you aim to change the environment in which technology actors have to operate. Now, if let's say we don't accept the notion that engineers do technology and citizens do society, but we say both are entangled, then you want to make citizens aware of how much their lives is shaped by technologies, how much their culture, their systems of meaning, their social relationships, power relationships, what have you, their ethics, their aspirations, their dreams, ideals, they're all touched upon by technology. And that's something that you want to teach everyone who is outside the technical university. And in that way, if you emancipate society into technological citizenship, that's one way of changing the work environment for technology actors. Because now they have to explain much more what they do. Now they have to justify their choices. Now they can expect to be critically assessed by outsiders. That's in the end what you aim for. So I think, yes, it's great to philosophize engineers, but now we're at a stage where we have to philosophize society and then tell engineers they're part of that society.
Yeah, and that's a very emancipatory aufklärerisch task still, right? Making citizens aware of the technical condition under which they live in all kinds of ways. We still have 5 minutes, and I have to leave around 2 o'clock for my students because I have a Zoom meeting immediately after this. So we have 5 questions for this other question from the audience. And it says, I'm addressing the question to Professor Tsjalling Swierstra again. I missed the reason for the absence of a chapter on tech in non-Western countries. Was it considered? No, we already said that. Are there non-Western tech philosophers or writers you consider?
Was considered, and we worked on it with an author. But unfortunately, after 2 years, we had to give up, and not let's say, I've never realized how much can go wrong when trying to produce a book, especially if you want to have it some coherence and you work with multiple authors. And yeah, to our sincere regret, this author in the end wasn't able to deliver something that was to our standards. And at that moment in time, we then were faced with the choice, either postpone the whole book for another 2 years and then update the chapters again, or get this version out, admit defeat, and look for an author for the second edition to add this necessary chapter. Yeah. So if you have any suggestions about a good author, I'm open.
What are ideas? What are ideas for if it can for a new edition? For if you would produce not this chapter, what are ingredients? What do you think of? Federica already said something about it.
Yeah, that's exactly the question that's also being asked by this one from the audience. Yeah, please.
I added so if you go question and answers, answered questions, somebody asked what were the two authors that I mentioned that kind of like work in that direction, and I put the links to their papers. So yeah, you can see that answer. I mean,
yeah,
it does not directly.
One tradition.
But there is at least in terms of what I was thinking about. Yeah.
But there is a tradition in philosophy of technology and science and technology studies that studies how technologies are transferred from the Western world to non-Western world. But that's very interesting, but it's also a little bit colonial. So what you brought up, Federica, to ask what do Chinese philosophers of technology, how do they think about technology, and in complementary or different ways than ours? That's then less colonial. It's and more also very interesting. That would be something to consider.
Yeah, and I think what we definitely will consider is including the work of Hugh Hui, who has written a lot on cosmotechnics, who wrote a whole book on Chinese philosophy and the traditions that are in there. And yeah, I think that's a very important perspective from continental philosophy, at least, working from Heidegger and Stiegler. But yeah, there's also an interesting stuff going on in anthropology and the ontological turn, etc. So yeah, that's, if there ever will be a second edition, this is going to be a very prominent chapter. Absolutely, that's no doubt about that. Unfortunately, it's about 2 o'clock. I have to leave. If there are no more urgent things to be said or questions to be asked, then I want to thank all of you, Tsjalling, Stephen, Federica, for this great presentations. And I know there are many more questions that we could go into, but we'll do that on another moment. Again, also the audience, thank you very much for being present here. And yeah, I think it was a successful meeting. I'm now going to close, and I hope to see you all again at some other occasion. Thanks a lot again. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.